at the time of death. So Prabhupada begins this purport. Persons acting in Krishna consciousness are never deviated from the path of entirely understanding the Supreme Personality of God. In the transcendental association of Krishna consciousness, one can understand how the Supreme Lord is the governing principle of the material manifestation, and even of the demigod. So, in the beginning of Krishna consciousness, one gradually becomes more and more convinced of the absolute truth by realization. It is not necessarily easy to do that. It might be a little difficult according to the degree of contamination which we come to Krishna consciousness with. Some persons come to Krishna consciousness not so contaminated as other persons. They're all different levels. Because we come to Krishna consciousness after having gone through many different forms of realization in previous lives. After all, this is not our first birth. We have been through many births and deaths before. That is part of the subject matter of this 7th chapter of Bhagavad Gita. Chaturvida Prajante Malam Jana Sukhitanarthana Artarto Artarti Jnani Jigyasur Arto Artarti Jnani Jigyasur Chabartasham. 4 types of pious persons surrender to Krishna. And those 4 types were described in Bhagavad Gita as those who are in distress, those who are looking for money, those who are curious, reaching out for something, and those who are in search of knowledge. One gradually develops through these different types of personalities. In other words, maybe one is rather impious in some lifetimes, so he is not interested in approaching the absolute truth at all. So he doesn't count as a pious man, because a pious man will always approach the absolute truth. But an impious man will never approach the absolute truth, no matter what the situation is, because it is not being very pious. Now, it is explained that as one gradually advances in life, he gradually comes to the point of being a little bit more pious. And when he actually makes it to the point of piety, then he will start to approach the absolute truth. But being that one is still in a low grade of advancement, he may be a Sudra by nature, and his main concern is that he's suffering, and he just wants to know how to get out of the suffering conditions of life. That's it. The first concern is to how to get out of suffering. Then, if one is a little bit more advanced, his next concern may be how to make money. Because just getting out of suffering is one thing. But how to actually make a lot of money and enjoy life is the real business of life. So therefore, when one is a little more advanced, he tries to accomplish this. Both classes of men try to accomplish their goals, either to become free from suffering or to make a lot of money, by approaching the Supreme Personality of God. In other words, they try to surrender to Krishna, but they do it with motivations. They're called Sakama Bhaktas, devotees who've got material desires to fulfill. Sometimes we talk of such persons as Karma Mishra Bhaktas. Karma Mishra. Mishra means mixed. Karma means mixed with the fruit of desire to enjoy in the material world. They want to enjoy freedom from miseries as a type of enjoyment, and attainment of wealth is a type of enjoyment. So sometimes such persons come and try to surrender to Krishna to attain some actual freedom. Then, after some development in their lives, maybe next lifetime, they come to the status of being curious, And then, maybe more advancement, they come to the status of looking for knowledge and trying to find out about the absolute truth. We find all types of men are trying to surrender to Krishna in this Krishna consciousness movement as well. Some come to Krishna just because they're suffering and they want relief. Some come just because they're economically depressed. I don't think this is so much in the Western world, but in India, this is definitely a factor. In the Western world, mainly everybody comes just because they're full of problems and they want them relieved. But for the higher class men, the real way to come before Krishna is to come looking for a solution to the problems of life by attainment of knowledge. Real knowledge. When one is factually very much advanced, he tries to surrender to Krishna through the attainment of knowledge. And in such a state, he's actually beginning to make some sufficient spiritual advancement of life. And after many births and deaths, such a person actually surrenders to Krishna. Others, they may surrender to some demigods, or some may just be so puffed up, they don't surrender to Krishna at all. Getting too cold? Some, they just don't surrender to Krishna at all. They don't see why they should. And Krishna never manifests himself to such fallen persons. Naham prakasha sarvasya yoga maya samavita Udo yam nabijanati lokayam aham ajayam lokaham ajam ajayam. Krishna says that I don't manifest myself before the fools and rascals of this material world. That means if you're actually a nonsense. You're not interested in Krishna. You don't want to surrender to Krishna. You don't care anything about Krishna. So Krishna doesn't have to manifest before you. It's not that Krishna is like your servant. You can just call him, hey boy, come here. Krishna is not like that. He's the Supreme Personality of God. When he wishes to appear, he appears. Otherwise, he doesn't appear. So you can't force Krishna to come and appear here in this material world as you like. But some class of man doesn't even want Krishna to appear, even at beck and call. They're just not interested in God at all. Such a class of man, extremely impious. Therefore, Krishna says, I reserve the right not to manifest before such persons because they're very much impious. They're not interested in anything Krishna conscious. So, Krishna will manifest to those who are engaged gradually in the development of his devotional service. Fully engaged and gradually developing in the devotional service of the Lord. Krishna will gradually reciprocate with such persons. As we advance, so Krishna reciprocates with us. As we make some advancement towards Krishna, Krishna also starts to approach us. In other words, it's a two-way street, spiritual life. Reciprocating relationship is there. We approach Krishna, Krishna approaches us. We sometimes can't think about it like that. We always think of God being fixed in one place. And we have to go to him. He's such a big man, he doesn't come to us. That's a good way to think about it. But in fact, the reality is a little different. It's good to think like that because that's humble. But that's not actually the reality of the situation. The reality of the situation is as we approach Krishna, so Krishna also approaches us. In other words, Krishna wishes us to come back to him. So he reaches out for us just as we are reaching out to him. Just like we see, there's a picture here in this Bhagavad Gita somewhere, in the picture section, where it's in relation to that verse, Mritu Samsara Sagara, where the Supreme Lord, riding on Garuda, picks up the devotee from the ocean of material birth and death because of the devotee's sincere surrender unto the lotus feet of the Lord. Well, what do you know? It's not there anymore. Used to be there in Bhagavad Gita anyway. Where? Huh? Oh, very good. So, it is a description how Krishna, riding on the back of Garuda, reaches down into the material world to pull us out of the material world. So that's very nice. We are reaching up for Krishna. But how we can go all the way to Krishna? It's very difficult. So Krishna comes down to us too. We're reaching up, he's reaching down. The combination is very nice. And he can pull us back to him gradually. That's the meaning of the word reciprocation. So by such nice reciprocation, when you're acting in Krishna consciousness, and you are always determined to somehow or another develop your consciousness of Krishna, then gradually, by transcendental association, one becomes convinced of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and at the time of death, such a Krishna conscious person can never forget Krishna. So that's the purpose of this verse. Krishna is saying, those in full consciousness of me, who know me, Supreme Lord, to be the governing principle of the material manifestation of the demigods and of all methods of sacrifice. Sadibhutadidaivam ram sadiyagyam. That is what it is said here. So, adibhutam, all of the material elements in the material manifestation. Sadidaivam, the demigods. Sadiyagyam, all sacrificial performances. All of these things, if you actually know these things, to be the Supreme Personality of Godhead in fact, not directly, but those to know Krishna as the governing principle. That these things come from Him. They are His, in fact. That He is the source of these things. That these things are dependent on Him. Such persons are actually in Krishna consciousness. Krishna consciousness means, ultimately, that Vasudeva is Sarvamiti. Vasudeva Krishna is everything. Now, that doesn't mean we're hidden Mayavadis. It means that we know what is the source of everything. Here we have some wood. So now you can analyze this wood. It just happened to be the thing my hand fell on when thinking of an example. You can just as well have any aspect of anything here in this room. So wood. Where does the wood come from? It comes from the store. Well, how did they get it? They bought it from some wood chopper who brought a tree. And where did he get it from? Well, he went to the forest and chopped the tree. Where did the forest get it from? Well, the forest grew a tree from another tree. One tree came from another tree. And where did that tree come from? Well, that tree came from another tree. Where did that tree come from? Well, that tree came from another tree. So where was the Adi tree? The original tree. Where did that come from? That came from Lord Brahma. And where did Lord Brahma come from? Well, he came from Garbhodakshai Vishnu. And where did Garbhodakshai Vishnu come from? Well, he came from an expansion of the Supreme Lord through the different Vishnu Murtis, Pradyumna, Vasudeva, Aniruddha, and Sankarshan. This caused the manifestation of the material world. Where did they come from? Well, ultimately they come from Lord Balaram, and where did he come from? He ultimately comes from Krishna. Now we have just traced back from a piece of wood, a lowly piece of wood, sitting here in this room, all the way back to the Supreme Personality of God. Saribhutam. He's the source of this whole cosmic manifestation, ultimate governing principle, ultimate origin of everything. Sadidaiva. Demigods as well. Just like we just described, Lord Brahma comes from Krishna. So Indra, Chandra, Varuna, Agni, the Maruts, Ashwini Kumars, Saraswati, also many demigods, demigoddesses. There are so many of them. 33 main demigods and millions of other subordinate demigods. They are all manifestations of the potency of the Supreme Lord. Krishna says, Aham adir hi devanam. I am the source of all the demigods. In other words, all the demigods are manifesting from the Supreme Personality of God. So I put them there. The demigods, they act as the administrators of the universe. Thus they act like the arms or the chest of the Lord in the universal principle. It's like the Kshatriyas manage. They are considered like of the social body, the arms of the chest of the social body. They represent power potencies. The Sudras represent the legs. The Vaishyas represent the stomach. The Brahmanas represent the head. So the demigods in universal affairs also represent the arms and the chest of the Supreme Personality of God. So all of them were put there by the Supreme Lord with the desire of organizing and administrating this whole material universe. The demigods, they are representatives of the Supreme Personality of God. They're just representatives of the Lord. So they represent Krishna, so he's their governing principle. He's the governing agency of their action. Therefore, they are his representatives. And Sadhyagya. Yagya means the performance of sacrificial rites, ceremonies, or anything which has to do with the process of offering to the Supreme Personality of God in any. We, in this Krishna consciousness movement, are meant to offer to the Supreme. We are meant to offer. Our lives are meant as an offering to Krishna. Sometimes when you make an offering, it is not that you will enjoy everything in that offering. Sometimes you won't enjoy anything. Let's say one is working very hard. We have seen when you are engaged in regulated deity worship, the deities must be given prasadam on time. Punctuality is the most important feature in deity worship. Everything must be right on time. Otherwise, it's not very good. And it must be very clean. So, exactly when the clock goes to the hour that the offering is supposed to take place, it should be there right in front of the deity. Now, sometimes when you are cooking for the deities like that, and you're just working like totally mad, running here, there, and everywhere, and at the last minute, everything just somehow gets on the plates, and out the door it goes. You don't even have time to meditate on what a nice job you did, how wonderful the plate looks. No enjoyment. Strict offering, just for Krishna, and boom, out the door it goes. No question of enjoying. And generally, cooks who are so much engaged in the frenzy of cooking for the satisfaction of the Lord, they don't even eat what they make afterwards. In fact, that used to be a rule in some temples, that to avoid the enjoying mentality, you should never eat what you cook. That way you never think you're cooking for yourself. Of course, when you're a little bit more advanced, you should eat what you cook, because if you did a bad job, you should suffer and never do it again. I think that principle's better, because it trains the cooks up. Anyway, so the point is that sometimes when you're offering something to someone else, you may not be enjoying the fruit of that offering. It's like when we go out and distribute on Sankirtan. Now, we are giving out books to others who are becoming Krishna conscious. And when they're becoming Krishna conscious through our book distribution, we may or may not see that. We may or may not be aware of that. Therefore, we we get the credit for that activity, but we're not directly aware of the fruit of that activity. Sometimes we are aware, sometimes. But generally the books go away with the person and they go and we don't see them again. Maybe some other devotee sees them, but we don't see them. Rarely, sometimes, you get an opportunity to directly reciprocate with some person, and that's very nice. Sometimes you all write to me with some experiences like that. That's very good. You can continue to write like that. But otherwise, you don't generally receive the fruits of your activities immediately. That's just the nature of this arrangement of Sankirtan. Long-term results. So, we just do it as a sacrifice for the satisfaction of the Supreme Lord, and whether or not we get satisfaction from that activity, that is not the point. The point is not that we shall be satisfied. The point is that Krishna shall be satisfied, not us. So whether or not we are satisfied doesn't count. What counts is that Krishna shall be satisfied. That's the real meaning of yajna. Therefore, real sacrificial performance is governed by the Supreme Personality of God. That you simply act for the satisfaction of Krishna. Now, most persons don't know this principle, especially if they're neophytes in devotional service. They think devotional service means I get bliss out of what I'm doing. I'm serving Krishna after all to be blissful. Isn't it? I've come to Krishna consciousness because I was suffering, and now I want to be blissful. That's my payment for devotional service. You don't give me money. You don't maybe give me fame, profit, and distinction. Therefore, my payment is bliss. You can pay me in bliss. So you may all have an experience of this sometime, how one is getting paid in blissfulness. So the point is that one should not think like that either, because sometimes, by the merciful arrangement of the Supreme, you don't get bliss, in fact you get suffering. Because Krishna is very merciful, and sometimes he gives you suffering. At that time, when you serve Krishna, it is only for the sake of satisfying Krishna, not for the sake of getting anything out of it. And such devotional service is actually pure. When you're serving Krishna without any idea of getting the results of that service. When you're serving Krishna simply with the idea of satisfying Krishna with that service. That is pure devotional service. And service wherein we require to get something out of it. That's not pure devotional service. That's mixed devotional service. And it's not as purifying. And it's not as auspicious. And it's not as nice as pure devotional service. Therefore, sometimes, if we are serving Krishna with the idea of becoming blissful, happy, praised, famous, sometimes Krishna helps us to show us our real position by taking all of this away and just simply giving us his lotus feet. Now, for the pure devotee, that is perfectly fine. Krishna can take away the whole universe, so long as at the end he gives his lotus feet. It's like Bali Maharaj thought it was wonderful that Krishna, Vaman, could take away the whole creation. He had already taken as his kingdom, Bali Maharaj, the whole universe. He conquered it by military might, even through the demigods out of their regions, the heavenly planet. So powerful. But when Vaman wanted to come and cheat him, when Vaman wanted to come and cheat him, then Bali Maharaj thought, we'll just leave it open so much. So, Bali Maharaj thought, all right, let the Lord be a cheat if he wants to cheat me, let him cheat me. I agree. Let him take away everything. That's all right. Because at the end, Bali Maharaj knew the lotus feet of the Lord were near. They were very near, in fact. They were right on his head. He very much liked this. The lotus feet of the Lord were directly on his head because he offered his head as sacrifice to the Supreme Personality of God. And Vamandev blessed him by just stepping on his head. Now, of course, Bali Maharaj didn't think, oh, this hurts. No. He thought, oh, what ecstasy. He had had everything taken away. The whole kingdom, everything, everywhere was gone, taken away by Vamandev. But what was left? Nothing. So he offered his own head, and Vamandev accepted that too. And he thought, how wonderful. This is an example of a perfect devotee of the Lord. A perfect devotee of the Lord knows that if Krishna comes and takes away everything, but at the end grants that devotee his lotus feet, then that devotee is very, very happy. He likes that. He doesn't think, oh, here's Krishna taking everything away. Oh, how terrible. He doesn't think like that. He thinks, oh, here's Krishna taking everything away. Oh, how wonderful. Sometimes we find, Yasyaham anugrahami harishe taddanam shanai. This is a famous verse which was quoted by Srila Prabhupada in relationship to his own life, that he was saying, of course this is from Srimad Bhagavatam and it relates to everybody's life, but Prabhupada used to quote it in relationship to his own life. He was saying that he was doing his business activity, and this was before his former history. And in that business activity, there was some success. Prabhupada's chemical company was actually successful. It was a big company, it was growing, manifesting more opulences. But then, at one point, it started to go bad. And a lot of intrigue was there, and economics weren't working very well, and the whole thing fell apart. So then, at that time, he was contemplating. Because when you lose all your money, the first thing that happens is your family members reject you. It's like the wife and the other members of the family, they think, this husband is just a bum. He has no money. He cannot support us. So at that time, his wife just went to live with her father and left him completely, taking with her the children. So Prabhupada was considering this. He said, externally, this situation is very bad. Business is terrible, losing money. Wife just went away from home, taking children. Seems to be not very good. But internally, this is very good. Because now this is a means to become freed from the attachments of this material world. Therefore, who needs this business? Who needs this wife and family? I'm going to go off and preach. And that's just what he did. Actually, he first started it as a test. He just went off as a test. But when he saw that there was some possibility of success in all of this business, he could actually preach and there was some audience ready to hear, then he understood this whole arrangement is Krishna's instigation. Krishna's pushing me to take up more the role of preaching. Therefore, Prabhupada went full-time into preaching activities. Thank you, Krishna. Because in this way, he came to us. Otherwise, had he not come, then there would be no Krishna consciousness movement. And can you imagine what we'd all be doing? I can't imagine. We would all be in a pretty miserable condition of life, is it not? If there was no Krishna consciousness movement. Rotting in the material world. Ooh, how horrible. Therefore, Prabhupada has actually given us the perfection of life. And this was all because everything was taken away. So sometimes when we are engaged in Krishna's service and still we are attached to some material things, Krishna helps us by taking those things away and giving us at the end the shelter of his lotus feet. And what those things are that he takes away, well, they may be different in each case. In some person's case, the thing may be wealth. In another person's case, the thing may be family members. In another person's case, the thing may be some fame, profit, distinction. In another person's case, it may be something else. Who knows what? There are so many possibilities of attachment in this world. As many things there are, as many things you can be attached to in this world. There's no limit to the attachment in this material world. Therefore, Krishna is expert. He's called Hari. You know what Hari means? No, not really. It means one who takes away. He who takes away. He may also take away your heart, that's true. But he's called Hari because he takes away everything. He also takes away your life at the end. He also takes away, perhaps, all your opulence. He takes away everything. It's death. All opulences, all fame, everything just gets taken away at the time of death. So they call him Hari. So, the Supreme Personality of Godhead takes away. Everybody's going to die. We forget that. We're thinking, this life is eternal. I will live forever in this body. This body will go on forever. Nothing to worry about. Everybody's convinced of this completely. Even if we're getting old and the body's falling to pieces, nobody wants to believe that death is coming. They just cannot accept it. People are so much attached in this material world. So, first thing to understand is I'm going to die. You don't look very convinced to me. And I may die soon. Who says death is not going to come for 50 years? What happens if tomorrow there's a big earthquake? House falls down. Boom, we're all squished. Can you say, no, it will not happen? Once in Zurich, I made that same class. And one boy said, I'm only 20 years, he was a guest. I'm only 20 years old. I'm not going to die. At least 50 years. I said, but how can you make such an insane statement? He says, for sure I'm not going to die. I say, but what if you walk out of the house and you don't watch where you're going and the truck runs you over? Because we live on a busy street corner. Cars always zooming by. So he said, that won't happen. I always look. I said, what if somebody throws a bomb on you? He said, they won't do it. This person was so dull. He refused to accept there was a possibility that he could die before he got old. I find this to be completely amazing. How anybody can say, I'm not going to die. Everybody else is going to die, but I'm not going to die. I'm going to live 50 years. Who can even guarantee he's going to live another 50 minutes? Who can guarantee like that? Absolute guarantee. Nobody. Because we are controlled by the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Nobody can avoid the control of the Supreme Lord. Not by great mystic opulences, not by great wealth, not by great power or military might. Nobody can avoid, whether he's a demigod or he's a ordinary man, nobody can avoid the control of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Everybody's under his control. Fixed. and immovable. Just like the great big sun goes in orbit exactly according to the direction of the Supreme Personality of Godhead and does not deviate from it. If the sun is so fixed, all the planets are so fixed under the direction of the Supreme. Imagine us. Everything out there is fixed. The seasons change. Now we're going into winter. It gets cold. It is not that during the time of moving to winter, it starts becoming very warm again. Because the arrangement of the Supreme is, it gets cold. And then at the end of that winter, it gets warm. That's it. That's just the way it is. You can't change that. Why? Because it's under the control of the Supreme. Similarly, you take your birth and you die. That's under the control of the Supreme, and everybody must die. So we should understand that I am controlled by Krishna. And if perhaps there are some circumstances which are not very nice, and I'm suffering a little bit this way or that way, we should understand that this is natural. This is the material world. The material world means suffering. But in the suffering condition of the material nature, one has got to learn how to surrender the lotus feet of the Supreme Personality of God and not be attached. We have to learn this principle of surrender. And then, when we are so understanding how everything we do is an act of service, of sacrifice to the Supreme Personality of Godhead, that it's not meant for our satisfaction, it's meant for Krishna's satisfaction. At that time we can engage fully in Krishna's loving devotional service without any other thought, without any desire for gain, without any other thought of having some safety or shelter anywhere else but at the lotus feet of the Lord. At that time we're fit to go back home, back to God. So it's not so easy to get to that platform. It's a little difficult because we are, after all, contaminated with material desires in this world. Therefore, we have to try and become Krishna conscious despite the many tests of this material nature. Material nature gives us many tests. Some of them harder to pass than others, but still we must try hard to surrender to Krishna in all circumstances and perform all of our activities as an offering, a sacrifice unto the lotus feet of the Lord and actually become happy. Are there any one or two questions? I think some got late. We got late because they got
when a person is impious, so then on its feet becomes impious. This happens.
Why? I don't know. How? I don't know. It's up to the Supreme Lord's mercy, or the mercy of the devotee. Or a person just by the inconceivable arrangement of the Supreme learns something. After a lot of time struggling in the material world, he realizes, I'm the cause of my own happiness and distress. At that time, he may become pious. It's completely up to the individual case, the arrangement of the Supreme or the mercy of a devotee.
Is it necessary that Krishna take all our material attachments?
No, you can free yourself from your material attachments by the regulated process of devotional service. It's not necessary that Krishna will come take everything away, throw you out in the street. In any case, he doesn't do like that.
Those devotees who took it, there are not so many, they can understand.
They're always so advanced. Krishna never gives you a test of kind of that. It may be difficult passing through
version. History Krishna.
Why not? It's certainly a good thing. You have it.
Chaitanya, and there was of course developed this about Chaitanya, but I'm interested because Prabhupada stated this about Nagaris and misconceptions of Chaitanya. So we speak about that this becomes some relationship, and what are these relationships that are possible with Chaitanya?
Only one relationship, servitorship. We all serve Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. That's the relationship.
What do you mean that one don't test of fire? Does this mean that he goes away from Krishna consciousness?
One don't test of What test of? We're talking about test of Krishna. So it's talking about test of mind. If someone doesn't pass the test of Maya, then
What does it mean?
one doesn't pass the test of Krishna. What does this mean? Means he failed. It means he failed.
To go where? What does this mean in terms of
No, not fell. Failed. Means not passed. I made a joke. Sweden, they made me a joke sign. A real one. Yeah, an actual I'd always been talking about my joke sign. So somebody actually made me one. One day I used it. Back to your question. If you fail, that doesn't mean that's the end of life or end of devotional life or anything. It just means that in that particular occasion, you didn't make it. So now try again. We have a saying, failure is the pillar of success. What does that say? Failure is the pillar of success. No. Failure is the pillar of success means that upon your failures, you can build up successful things. It's not exactly the same thing you learn by your mistake. That's included in it. But in fact, you may fail in what you do, but that failure becomes an impetus to go and do something successful. You know, behind every successful attempt, there are many unsuccessful attempts. So, not lose.
This is our failure.
Well, there's always some failure. And there's some. I don't know anybody who succeeds immediately. of what? What is the walls? Yes, we have, very simply, we have our 4 regulative principles, 16 rounds a day. Programs at the temple. The most important thing is to associate in the temple. If you just come here and associate every day in the temple, then automatically you become Krishna conscious, even without struggling very much. But if one stays alone outside of the temple, or one is not following the principles, or chanting, or reading the books, and engaging in service, then one falls down quickly. Therefore, when you stay in association with the devotees, in such a transcendental association, one gradually becomes convinced of the Supreme Personality of Godhead and makes advancement. If you don't do that, or one makes offenses against devotees, or one makes offense against the Supreme, one develops bad association or something. Develop technique, walking, mindset. When there's a doubt, they know how to walk. Never see devotees walk. China. But you better make sure you're always engaged in Krishna's service. That way, all these little karmic activities don't affect one so much. Then you take them out of the way. That is why we capture flies and throw them out, mosquitoes and throw them out. We don't take our swatter and scratch. And if they don't jump in your water, oh no. Means there's nobody else who is his equal. That's an English expression. It says it doesn't have an equal. Second, somebody just as good. Somebody else. Another one just as good. Well, if they're sufficiently repressed, that's good enough, isn't it? Like, in other words, if you pile on top of your material desires an ocean of Krishna consciousness, then these desires are just crushed out of existence. But you have to purify the desire in the heart to be the enjoyer. That's the real desire that's purified. All these other desires are simply manifestations of that. Those other desires, you just cover them with Krishna consciousness. But that desire, you can't just cover away. You have to purify that. So that's the desire that's getting purified. You understand the difference? So, one is born of the soul and the other is born of the body. So many desires are born of the body. Those you cannot purify directly like that so easily. You have to just cover them over with Krishna conscious activity. But the ones in the heart, of the soul, I want to be the enjoyer, I want to be the controller, that has to be purified by the process of Krishna.
has the toughest of all. That's tough one.
Because they're not very important for one to follow, therefore they weren't described. But it's mainly taking bath, offering mantras at the side of the Ganges. In Indian tradition, before you take prasadam or lunch, you'll take a bath, take care of necessities of life, make some worship and offering, chant some mantras. Yes. Well, Krishna may be satisfied in general with what you're doing. You may not, and you may be satisfied in general, but in a specific case, it may be very agitating. Like, for instance, Arjuna knew that Krishna was satisfied with him in general on the battlefield of Croatia. Arjuna also knew that what he was doing was satisfying Krishna. But while he was in the middle of the battle, there were arrows flying all over the place, sticking them here and sticking them there. It's not that he was very happy. Like on a battlefield, you're not very happy. He was performing his duty, and his duty meant trouble. But he was satisfied taking that trouble because Krishna wanted it. Understand? No. Sometimes it's just a suffering. But that suffering we take as our enjoyment in service to the Lord. Because it's for Krishna. Otherwise, we just pure fruit of workers. I work, I get bliss. At the end of the week, I want my bowl of bliss. Otherwise, no work. Go on strike. No bliss, no work. This is pure fruit of activity. Pure devotional service is unmotivated. No bliss, we work. Bliss, we work. Happiness, we work. Distress, we work. We work under all circumstances. In satisfaction, in happiness, distress, bliss, misery. Maybe somebody's thinking, wow, this sounds like the wrong movement. So Krishna may give you your one bowl of bliss a week for a while. But at one point, you've got to learn how to surrender. So maybe you get a half a bowl. Maybe one week somebody steals your bowl. There's no bliss bowl. One has to be ready. But at the end, there's the big bliss. Go back to God. But Lord Chaitanya said he's not even working for Krishna with that in mind. Mama Janmani Janmani Ishwari. Bhavatu Bhakti or Haitaki. I only want your service. Even if I take birth again and again. So much surrender.